Virtual reality, long seen as simply a dream, has evolved over the past decade to become one of gaming's most interesting sectors of technological advancement. Multiple companies, including giants like Facebook, Sony, and Microsoft, have all tried their hand at crafting a new way to play video games through these headsets. Virtual reality, however, is not a new phenomenon. In fact, the roots of the virtual reality craze can be traced back to the technological boom of the 1980s and 1990s. Of all the players in the world of video games, none failed more spectacularly than Nintendo. In the mid-90s, the company was seen as almost untouchable, with multiple best-selling consoles to their name. Nintendo's attempt at virtual reality, however, marked the first time the historic creator fumbled with a piece of hardware and showed the world that the big N could be beat if they failed to innovate. In the decades since, that failure has only grown in legend, with even Nintendo being able to poke fun at their least successful game console to date, the Virtual Boy. Everything has a story. This is the story of the Virtual Boy. In this video, we'll be taking a look at the long development of the Virtual Boy and the tech that powered it. We'll also be discussing the launch and legacy of this infamous gaming system. Unlike many of the products Nintendo has crafted over the decades, the Virtual Boy didn't get its start at the company. In fact, the Virtual Boy's origins don't start in Japan. Across the Pacific Ocean in the United States, a company called Reflection Technology Inc., or RTI, start our tale. In 1985, RTI began development of a product known as the Private Eye. Simplistic in design, the Private Eye was developed as a small screen powered by LEDs that could function as a portable and private screen for the wearer. Developed with stereoscopic 3D in mind, the Private Eye was envisioned for the everyday business person who wanted to check their faxes quickly or utilize a small portable computer in a crowded environment. Entertainment, medical, and even military applications were researched for the Private Eye, but RTI was unable to find any buyers or investors for their new product. In 1990, RTI shifted their focus to utilizing the Private Eye in the growing field of video games. The rise in popularity of virtual reality in the early 1990s led RTI to innovate by strapping two Private Eyes together and making a makeshift headset attached to a computer. To showcase the possibilities of this technology, RTI developed a technical demo where the player controlled a tank from the driver's seat. RTI took their new prototype to a handful of game and toy manufacturers, including Hasbro, Mattel, and even Sega. All of these companies declined to work with the Private Eye technology, with Sega going so far as to say that they thought the product would cause motion sickness for their consumers. Not wanting to give up, the developers at RTI managed to secure a meeting with gaming's biggest player, Nintendo. The tank demo was shown to a handful of engineers at Nintendo, including legendary designer Gunpei Yokoi. Yokoi started his career at Nintendo all the way back in 1965 as a maintenance worker at one of Nintendo's factories. Yokoi spent his time fixing machines used to produce Nintendo's Hanafuda cards, but spent his free time on the job crafting bizarre inventions with leftover parts. One of these inventions was an extending arm toy, later marketed as the Ultra Hand. Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi noticed the prototype during a factory tour and fell in love with the product. Yamauchi offered Yokoi the opportunity to develop the Ultra Hand into a mass-market toy, and pulled the young creator from his duties as a machine maintenance worker. The Ultra Hand proved to be a success, selling over 1 million units and helping keep Nintendo afloat during the late 1960s. Yokoi continued to rise within Nintendo thanks to his creative expertise. Yokoi focused mostly on toy creation during this time, before being brought over to a new wing of Nintendo in 1974, game design. In 1980, Yokoi's Game & Watch line of systems first launched, and helped usher in Yokoi's design philosophy for the rest of his career: lateral thinking with Withered technology. Yokoi continued his rise through Nintendo. He mentored a young Shigeru Miyamoto during the development of Nintendo's first big arcade hit, Donkey Kong. He helped design the D-pad for the NES, a key to every controller since its introduction. Yokoi's biggest success came in 1989 from the Game Boy, an 8-bit portable game system with interchangeable cartridges. Yokoi's success, however, had left him dissatisfied with the game industry. During the NES era, Yokoi was promoted to head of Nintendo's R&D 1 unit, producing games like Kid Icarus and Metroid. After development of the Game Boy wrapped, Yokoi began making plans to retire from Nintendo in 1991 at the age of 50. The console arms race to Yokoi failed to offer an interesting avenue for creation. The Private Eye, however, brought Yokoi back in. Impressed with the technology displayed in RTI's tech demo, Yokoi championed the new tech within Nintendo. RTI had one final challenge, however. Despite the backing of Yokoi and other engineers and designers at Nintendo, it was ultimately up to Nintendo's board of directors on whether or not the company would pursue development of the Private Eye. RTI took the opportunity to showcase the Private Eye to Nintendo's board of directors, where Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi famously fell asleep during the meeting. RTI felt like their chances of success were over with Yamauchi's nap, but later found it to be a blessing that they needed. Yamauchi, in his final years as president of the company, relied more and more on his employees to make decisions with new technology. His nap signals his confidence in not just his staff, but the product at hand. Nintendo licensed the Private Eye technology exclusively for video games to the tune of $10 million in advance royalties. Work on developing the Private Eye into a consumer-friendly product began quickly, with Yokoi and his team heading up development of Project VR32. RTI's tank demo did more than just sell the Private Eye to investors. It had inspired Yokoi to create a gaming system unlike anything else on the market. The new unit was powered by a 32-bit processor and focused on immersing players into a new world or reality. Initial plans for the device focused on making it a light, wearable headset that could be played anywhere. Yokoi thought that Nintendo's next breakthrough would come from this wearable technology. However, reality quickly set in. Having the device so close to one's face led to fears within Nintendo of safety concerns regarding radio waves. The sound of the device was also noticeably loud when worn. Nintendo opted to use a large metal sheet in the headset to separate the components further from the user's face. Unfortunately, this led to the device being too heavy to comfortably wear. The design of Project VR32 grew from a portable headset to an odd shoulder-mounted device, but liability concerns prompted Nintendo to once again turn away from this. Instead, the device was given a stand to hold up the console, with no attachments to the user itself. With the product now stationary, Yokoi's team was forced to make a number of concessions, including the removal of head tracking. Issues surrounding the product didn't stop there. Cost concerns forced Nintendo to invest in cheaper alternatives when it came to the VR32's display. Rather than offer a wide color spectrum with the use of blue, green, and red LEDs, Nintendo stuck with RTI's red LEDs from the prototype. A full-color display was estimated to charge a $500 price tag on the unit in an era where new game consoles rarely saw success with high price points. In addition, the Product Liability Act of 1995 proved to be another concern for Nintendo. The Japanese law, first passed in 1994, went into effect on July 1, 1995. The law made companies include more product warnings and conduct more safety tests for their products. Fearing backlash over a variety of situations, Project VR32 morphed into an odd tabletop device rather than the wearable virtual reality portal many had hoped for. Project VR32, now called the Virtual Boy, was first shown off at Space World 1994 to an enthusiastic audience. But opinions quickly shifted as the gaming press got their hands on the device. With no other competition on the market, Nintendo's attempt at virtual reality was certainly more impressive than Sega or other manufacturers' empty showings, but the device wasn't exactly the technological powerhouse gamers were wanting. By the end of 1994, new 32-bit game consoles from Sony and Sega were pushing the industry beyond the devices Nintendo had out on the market, and their next console, the Ultra 64, wouldn't be ready for release until 1996. Nintendo feared that conceding the market to its competition for too long would hurt the company more than ever. Project VR32 quickly went from in-house development oddity to Nintendo's next home system overnight. In 1995, while the world played the Sega Saturn, PlayStation, and awaited the arrival of the Nintendo 64, the Virtual Boy would make its debut. Heading into 1995, Nintendo had high hopes for the Virtual Boy system. When the system was revealed, Nintendo boldly claimed that they would sell 3 million units during the first year. Nintendo brought the Virtual Boy to America in January of 1995 during the Winter Consumer Electronics Show. Enthusiasm for the system was mixed, with Americans being unimpressed or confused by the new console. For some, this was not the virtual reality they had envisioned, let alone the type created by the visionaries at Nintendo. As 1995 pressed on, development of the Virtual Boy was rushed to completion. Yokoi's team carried much of the burden when crafting not just the system, but the lineup of games for it as well. Internally, much of Nintendo's focus at the time was on the development of the Nintendo 64 and its killer app, Super Mario 64. The Virtual Boy was offered the scraps of Nintendo's creativity, as C-tier Nintendo stars were brought in to headline the new console. Nintendo's biggest stars, Mario and his creator Shigeru Miyamoto, were noticeably absent from the Virtual Boy's lineup. The rushed development also constrained the hardware of the Virtual Boy, as the system was not ready for launch in 1995 and likely wouldn't be for several more years. The Virtual Boy debuted in Japan on July 21st, 1995, to noticeably little fanfare. Unlike previous Nintendo systems, Japanese gamers weren't lining up to purchase the new console. This low enthusiasm was brought on by Japanese press, who pointed out the many health warnings associated with the Virtual Boy that were plastered across the console's box, its games, and even with in-game messages that encouraged taking breaks. North America saw the system come out less than a month later when it released on August 16th. Support in North America was more positive, but the Virtual Boy wasn't nearly as big as a hit as previous Nintendo consoles in the region. Nintendo backed the Virtual Boy with a meaty $25 million ad campaign. Included in this campaign was a special promotion with Blockbuster to let gamers play the system. Over 3,000 Blockbuster locations received Virtual Boys that were then rented to customers for $10 over a few days. Upon returning the system, customers were given a $10 off coupon for future Virtual Boy purchases. Sadly, this plan would backfire, as many consumers rented the system and opted against buying it. Europe received the worst of the Virtual Boy lineup, as Nintendo's efforts in the region were considered a lower priority to the homeland in the blossoming American market. The Virtual Boy was never released in any European or PAL territories. The Virtual Boy launched at $179.99 in the United States. Included in the package was the Virtual Boy itself, a small stand to sit the console on, the appropriate controllers and power cables, and a copy of Mario Tennis, one of the few games to feature the plumber on the Virtual Boy. Compared to other 32-bit systems, the Virtual Boy was significantly cheaper. The PlayStation retailed for $299, while the Sega Saturn launched at $399. However, the Virtual Boy was no match for other portable systems. Nintendo's own Game Boy was sold for $60 and came with a massive library of games despite being on outdated hardware. 3 additional games were available at launch in both Japan and North America. Nintendo's R&D 1 team developed the pack-in title of Mario Tennis, as well as a boxing game called Teleraboxer. Frequent Nintendo collaborator Intelligent Systems developed Galactic Pinball. The final game was Red Alarm, developed by T&E Soft. It was a space shooter inspired by Nintendo's Star Fox series. All launch titles were published by Nintendo, as third parties weren't given a priority when developing for the Virtual Boy. New software was sparse for the Virtual Boy. Each month following the launch of the system featured 1 or 2 new games, with many of them being underwhelming when compared to the offerings on other game systems. Nintendo R&D 1 released 2 more games for the system following its launch. Mario Clash, an updated take on the original Mario Bros., released in late September and early October. The Virtual Boy's killer app, Wario Land, landed on shelves in late November and early December. The only other notable release at this time was Jack Bros, a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series, and the first release of the now popular franchise beyond Japan's borders. In Japan, a total of 19 games were released in 1995, with 8 of those being exclusive to the region. North America saw fewer titles, with only 12 being available, and 1 exclusive for the region, Ocean Software's Waterworld. The Virtual Boy was off to a rough start following its launch. In Japan, the system moved a little over 100,000 units by the end of 1995, prompting the company to write it off as a failure and in production. Nintendo's American branch had better luck with the system, moving 350,000 units during 1995 and continuing production on the system in 1996. In North America, the system did receive a minor price cut of $20 in October of 1995, lowering the price to $159.99. By 1996, the Virtual Boy was on life support, and it wouldn't be around for much longer. 2 final North American releases came out in February and March that year. In May, Nintendo announced yet another price cut for the Virtual Boy, lowering the cost of entry to only $99. A renewed marketing campaign was put into place, and new titles were in development for the console by mid-1996. Sadly, it was too late. With Nintendo's focus shifting to the Nintendo 64, the Virtual Boy was quietly discontinued by the end of 1996, selling less than 1 million units worldwide. The Virtual Boy was a complete and utter failure for Nintendo, and arguably the first failure during Nintendo's days as a console manufacturer. For many, it might just be a footnote in Nintendo's history, but for Gunpei Yokoi, it shifted his plans for the future once again. Not wanting to leave Nintendo on a low note, Yokoi stayed with the company for a little longer to help develop one last product, the Game Boy Pocket. In August of 1996, Yokoi finally handed in his resignation at Nintendo to start a new chapter in his life. After 31 years at the company and countless innovations, Yokoi left with his head held high despite the Virtual Boy's failings. In the months following his resignation, Yokoi founded his own company, Koto Laboratory, to continue his innovative work with game consoles. Yokoi and his team developed the Wonder Swan for Bandai, and the device, the final one bearing Yokoi's name, was released in 1999 to compete against Nintendo's Game Boy Color and the Neo Geo Pocket. Sadly, Yokoi was never able to live out his golden years developing hardware as he saw fit. On October 4th, 1997, Yokoi was involved in a car crash on a Japanese expressway. Yokoi exited the vehicle to inspect damages when he was struck by another vehicle and fatally wounded. Yokoi passed away at the age of only 56. Yokoi's legacy, unlike that of the Virtual Boy, continues to endure. Released in 1997, Yokoi wrote Yokoi Gunpei Gamehouse, a book detailing the legendary inventor's philosophy on game design. Yokoi championed a design practice known as lateral thinking with Withered technology. Seen in products like the Game & Watch, Game Boy, and Virtual Boy, Yokoi believed in using older technology in innovative ways to create new experiences. Best of all, the older technology was often cheaper to produce than the latest cutting-edge technology and helped Nintendo dominate the handheld gaming market for years. Arguably, Yokoi's influence is still seen at Nintendo today. Since the release of the Nintendo Wii, the Nintendo of today opts for interesting design decisions, as opposed to the continued race for more powerful hardware. The Virtual Boy itself is remembered now as more of a novelty than anything else. The system has appeared as an Easter egg in titles like Super Smash Bros. Melee and Tomodachi Life, but Nintendo rarely acknowledges its existence compared to the likes of the NES, Super Nintendo, and Game Boy line of systems. Virtual Boy games have never been re-released and remain trapped on the system to this day. For many people, their only option to experience this incredibly niche console is through emulation. Although it was a failure, the Virtual Boy was ahead of its time. In the past decade, virtual reality headsets have finally been able to achieve more mass market appeal as the technology behind these headsets gets better and the price more affordable for consumers. Nintendo's interest in both 3D gaming and virtual reality has continued as well. In 2011, the Nintendo 3DS continued the Virtual Boy's crusade to offer true 3D gaming to the public, all without the necessary 3D glasses required for TVs or movie theaters. In 2019, Nintendo released the closest thing yet to a virtual reality headset with the Nintendo Labo VR kit. The VR kit didn't utilize any new electronics, but instead boxed in the player's viewpoint around the Switch's tablet display. Nintendo even updated a few select titles to function with the VR headset. Since then, Nintendo has not made any announcements regarding VR headsets or updates to existing games. In the end, the Virtual Boy may have been a failure from the start. Its long development, concerns of damage to the body, and botched launch all culminated to become Nintendo's worst-selling standalone system of all time. But I think, in another reality, the Virtual Boy could have been a success. If it had more time to develop, with better games and a strong marketing push across the entire world, we might remember the Virtual Boy as another one of Nintendo's success stories. At the end of the day, however, it serves as a warning against rushed hardware, and whose legacy will forever be tied to failure. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this bonus video about the Virtual Boy. If you haven't already, be sure to check out The Great Console War, the story of Sega versus Nintendo, to know more about Nintendo's history during the early and mid-1990s when the Virtual Boy was released. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like and share this video on your favorite social media sites. In the comments below, tell me what you think of the Virtual Boy, and if you think Nintendo should try their hands at crafting another VR experience. Be sure to subscribe to catch the next video as soon as it releases. And as always, thank you for watching.